New Rhystic Studies t-shirts at stitchersupply.com. This episode is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Go to cardkingdom.com/studies to pick up really bad cards that overachieve in peculiar circumstances. You know, like Balustrade Spy and Jack-o'-lantern, and other weird 10-cent commons from your favorite pile of draft chaff. Thanks Card Kingdom for the support. I'm a member of Team BASILISK, the esports organization on a mission to inspire the next generation of scientists through the study and play of difficult games. I'm stoked to welcome Justin Wong to the team, a living legend from the fighting game community and 9-time winner of EVO, the most of anyone in history. Man, we're really assembling a pretty good crew here. Thanks Basilisk for the support. On July 13th, 2024, speedrunner Count LG beats The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time in 3 minutes, 47 seconds, and 900 milliseconds. There are two ways to explain this feat. The first involves a mechanical understanding of the RNG and glitches and exploits at play. That can be satisfying for those within the scene who are familiar with all the techie nuances that make this run impressive, like why Link spends more time backflipping than running forward, and how Count LG tripped the code here into transforming the 3D zone into a 2D outcrop, like some unfinished stage from Super Smash Bros. The other explanation requires no inside knowledge whatsoever. What happened here was simple. Someone booted up a game, skipped the middle parts with some clever sleight of hand, and teleported straight to the finish line, in this case the closing cutscene with the princess herself. They reduced the novel to 2 pages. They sang a 1-second song. Video games lend themselves to a culture of speedrunning, and in many ways invite the challenge. But what if you wanted to speedrun a card game? Void of buggy software and dexterity skill checks, card games nonetheless have beginnings, middles, and endings. Time is measured not in minutes and seconds, but in phases and turns. Rules are not laws, and their exceptions create loopholes, like glitches. With focused intent, you can tug at that fabric until the seams loosen and tear. And when the whole thing unravels, you might feign a half-hearted apology, as if it were all an accident.
Oops. Oops.
Oops.
Oops. Oops. Oops.
Oops. Blue, purple, red, nothing but the awesomely sweet taste of all crunch berries.
And what do you have to say for yourself?
Oops.
The very last day of 2012 was a Monday, and we all collectively exhaled a sigh of relief. The world had not ended in Cataclysm, and as a bonus, Gatecrash previews were landing on the mothership. The second set in the Return to Ravnica block would provide the remaining 5 guilds with fresh legends and refreshed logos, plus 1 new keyword mechanic per faction, save House Demir. Secretive as they were given 2 mechanics, 1 explicit and 1 opaque. The former was properly named Cypher, but the latter, colloquially known within R&D as Grind, was demoted from the file halfway through development by Mark Gottlieb after he took lead of the set from Rosewater. 4 cards total can grind in Gatecrash, which reveals cards from the top of target player's library until they hit a land, then dumps that pile into their graveyard. From these 4 cards, 2 innocuous commons caught the eye of legacy aficionado Jason Abong. By January 16, 2013, he had assembled together a deck with Balustrade Spy and Undercity Informer as the marquee cards, a surprising idea given Legacy's much higher floor on power. More striking was the conceit that enabled these cards to flourish. To fully leverage their weird ability, the deck played 0 lands. Offsetting the lack of permanent mana sources, Abong loaded up on a suite of free one-shot generators like Lotus Petal and the 2 Spirit Guides, plus 4 Dark Rituals for acceleration. The goal was to cast one of the 2 rogues as fast as possible, flip the entire deck into the graveyard, then reanimate a set of creatures to win the game on the spot. It was ambitious and full of pinch points, but it had a plan. During an offhand Twitch stream, Jason Abong put the list on the radar of former Pro Tour grinder turned play designer Adam Prosak. Within a week, Prosac was seriously considering the Undercity Informer combo. In a piece published for Star City Games, he speculated about its potential as a real deck. Think outside the box. What happens if we target ourselves? And what happens if we don't have any lands in our deck? Oops, all spells. After providing his own take on the concept, Prosac concluded the article with tentative optimism. Truth be told, I'm not sure how good this deck is. I don't think it will define Legacy, but you can't make something broken if you don't try. Meanwhile, on MTG The Source, user Phazon Mutant had already opened the discussion on the 2 Hermit Druids of Gatecrash. By the time Prosac's article went live, the forum was deliberating on what to name Abong's deck. The placeholder of Rogue Hermit was up for contention. The mechanic this is abusing is unofficially called grinding, so why don't we call the deck Grinder? I was thinking more in line of Breakfast Snaps, as it's a breakfast deck that is just super fast. Can we please start calling this deck Blackjack? Dead Drop captures both the elements of espionage and the physical act of dropping the whole library into the graveyard, quite literally a drop into death. I've never heard the deck called Rogue Hermit before. I think Undercity Breakfast is an infinitely better name. I have never heard the deck called Undercity Breakfast before, only Rogue Hermit or Oops All Spells. Maybe you should create a deck next time. The bickering was all for naught. Prosac's article had already cemented the deck's moniker to players outside of the forum. Oops All Spells kept with the tradition of naming combo decks in Legacy after breakfast cereals, and aptly described the main gimmick behind the engine. Remember, this deck ran 0 lands. On February 9th, 2013, Ben Williams was featured in a deck tech at SCG New Jersey, which all but sealed the deal on what to call this thing.
I am here with Ben Williams, who is undefeated with one of the more popular decks today, actually. There's 6 or 7 of them in the room. The Adam Prosac popularized Oops All Spells.
In round 5, Williams caught a feature match against High Tide and showed the peanut gallery just how fast you can speedrun a game of Magic.
It looks like Ben's just going off on turn 1. There's a Dark Ritual, there's the Coval Ritual, and there it is.
Yeah, so 1 mana floating. Balustrade Spy, Ray can't do anything.
He can just flip over his entire deck, right?
Yeah, he should.
After successfully landing a Balustrade Spy, Ben started grinding through cards in his library until he found a land. But of course there were no lands in his deck, so by default his library instantly became his graveyard. How then did he win? Well, this is the part where we explain Link's wacky bunny hops and backflips. Once Balustrade Spy's Enter the Battlefield ability resolves, and the Oops deck is in the graveyard, a chain reaction of triggers and sequences takes effect. It begins with 4 Narcomoebas returning to play. With these, the Oops player has 2 options, both involving sacrificing the creatures to pay for a flashback cost. Option 1 is turning a safety valve. Sacrifice Narcomoeba to flashback Cabal Therapy, naming a disruption spell to protect the combo. Option 2 is performing the combo itself. Sacrifice 3 Narcomoebas to flashback Dread Return, which pulls a creature from the graveyard into play. In the first version of Oops, the only target for Dread Return was Angel of Glory's Rise, which upon entering puts another trigger on the stack to reanimate all humans. 2 specific humans defines the deck's true win condition and its sole enabler respectively, Laboratory Maniac and Azami, Lady of Scrolls. To complete the combo, activate Azami's ability to draw a card from an empty library, tapping either herself or Labman, both of whom are wizards. If an opponent attempts to remove Labman in response, tap the other wizard to put the same trigger on the stack and, ideally, win the game anyway. All of this could happen as early as turn 1. Stop the clock and meet the princess.
Okay, I know what this is now. We lost. I'm not mad at this. This is a new and developing deck. The name of the deck is called the Rogue Hermit. Basically, he's about to mill himself, bring back the 4/7 angel that brings back all humans. So he's going to target himself, mill himself entirely. All the Narcomoebas are going to come back in, and then he will get back. There it is. Angel of Glory's Rise. Interesting interaction. Awesome deck. This is his whole deck, by the way, main board. There are no lands in it, and it has to be that way.
By March 2013, Oops All Spells had sent its first minor ripples through the competitive scene, but theory crafters on the source were still unconvinced about its potency. What makes this deck different or better than the rest of the combo decks in Legacy? That's the $40,000 question. It's definitely different, but is it better? The proof, of course, is in the pudding. The deck has to start winning to be considered a real thing. On March 28th, Eternal Magic guru Stephen Menendian weighed in on the matter with a thorough article detailing all the possible iterations of the shell. In this piece, Menendian makes a significant observation that will plague the discussion around playable cards for the next decade: the viability of free cantrips. In his words, "I think any legacy list with these cards is incorrectly built. You don't really care about thinning, and you don't actually want to see the cards that aren't in your opening hand, because they essentially become unknown variables." Menendian concludes the article with the same hesitant optimism felt by Prozac and others in the forum. "I very much enjoyed the existence of a deck like this in Legacy. It's difficult to say, but I think it's possible that Rogue Hermit may be stronger in Legacy than Vintage. Time will slowly prove him correct." A week later, Tonio Hernandez took Oops to third place out of 127 players in the TLA Legacy Torneo in Spain. 2 weeks after that, Oops appeared again in fourth place in the same circuit. In October 2013, Jeremy Barbeau carried Oops to the finals of the Legacy Open of SCG Milwaukee. He dominated his semifinals match, killing his opponent on turn 1 in 2 minutes and 39 seconds. Not that anyone's keeping time. In Game 2, the Dredge player produced a couple of early Narcomoebas, but they were no match against those of the Speedrunner.
Love this, love this. And look at that handshake. Two hands. Says thank you for having such a fun deck.
This is the city of brotherly love, isn't it? Is Philadelphia?
Philadelphia? No, we are in Milwaukee.
Milwaukee, I'm sorry.
Barbeau lost in the finals, but his deck was featured on the Mothership in December, marking the first moment of high-profile recognition on the game's official website. Perhaps this meant the deck was real, at least enough for a passing spotlight. Notably, Barbeau played the free cantrip package of 4 Street Wraiths and 4 Gitaxian probes. Wizards remarked this essentially made it a 52-card deck, but for Menendian and others, these cards led to nothing but dead hands. Significant as well was the title of the article. Prozac's name had stuck. Back on the forum, the builders and tuners were still wary about the many weaknesses of Oops All Spells. In a matter-of-fact manner, user ESG outlined every point of failure facing the deck. It doesn't run enough initial mana sources, it can't reliably produce black mana early, it lacks protection, it's weak to removal. If there was a way to shrink the kill package, then more space could be allotted to initial mana sources or protections or tutors. My opinion is that this deck is not currently viable. Looking back now, ESG was correct on each assessment. In time, every one of these pressure points would be relieved, slowly at first, and then all at once. In the 6 years between 2014 and 2020, Oops was quietly metabolizing in the deep underbelly of the legacy metagame. On rare occasion, it would momentarily resurface, flaunting a new bad card that seemed tailor-made to its game plan, like a speedrunner discovering an alternate button sequence that shaves seconds from their personal best.
Angel of Glory's Rise Reanimator combo with Dread Return, getting back Laboratory Maniac and Azami Lady of Scrolls, tap the Lady of Scrolls to try to draw a card, you have no cards left, so you win.
In 2014, John Torres and others were dabbling with Bridge from Below, a good card with the specific application of cushioning flashback costs. In 2015, Kyle Chandler brought a variation of Oops to Grand Prix Seattle running Underworld Cerberus, a bad card that offered a roundabout way to hardcast Laboratory Maniac from your hand, among other tricks. 2016 was quiet. In May 2017, at a Haruruya tournament in Japan, Kaneyama Haruki placed with an even more elaborate derivative of Oops, simply named The Spy. This version ran a wild package of win cons pulled straight from the EDH bin in Lord of Extinction, Triskelion, and the Mimeoplasm, with no Azami or Labman in sight. 2018 ushered in more Commander tech with Garna the Bloodflame. User Caprino from the source began tinkering with this card and making undefeated runs in Legacy Leagues through May and June. Still, the format overall remained resilient to Oops' tricks. But a month later in July, Deathrite Shaman was banned, and so fell the first domino. As Ian Duke wrote, the incidental graveyard hate provided by Deathrite Shaman's abilities automatically protect against offbeat strategies like Dredge and Reanimator. We also see a reduction in diversity in the environment, an inability for the metagame to adjust, and a dominant strategy that's particularly hostile to rogue decks and innovation. Hostile to rogue decks, you say? In September, Chase Alsop made a splash at GP Richmond with a flashy kill on camera.
Wow, that deck is so cool. So that deck seems amazing when you watch it. What keeps that from being a tier 1 deck?
It doesn't have any lands, BDM. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. October brought Guilds of Ravnica, and with it, a brief consideration of Lotleth Giant as an alternate win condition. The eternal conundrum of this deck is that every new bad card must be seriously considered, and Brewers on the Source deliberated this one well into the new year. Ultimately, it felt like yet another lateral movement, and not a legitimate upgrade. On June 3rd, 2019, the game changed for everyone, and a new glitch unlocked for Oops All Spells. The London Mulligan announcement marked an ongoing effort in Magic to increase the number of keepable hands to start a game, thereby decreasing the de facto losses to players facing Flood or Screw. But relieving the pressure on one axis redistributed the weight to another. To quote Ian Duke once more, "There's a risk that combo decks could abuse a very strong mulligan to much more reliably assemble a combo in the early game. When the theoretically perfect Oops hand only requires 4 cards to combo off, 3 extra mulligans on the play means this deck could exploit the new rule better than any other in the format. And it would. All it needed was a slimmer and more efficient way to win." Enter the Oracle. On January 7th, 2020, user Not Kevin posted to the forum, "Ooh, something that is for us." User Jax followed up in agreement. "This is the best win condition ever for this deck, hands down. Out was Lotleth Giant, in was Thassa's Oracle, and suddenly Link had found the fastest route to backflip through Kokiri Forest." Despite finally gaining a legitimate win con, one that combines the entire Angel Azami Labman package into one card, Oops was still not posting results. The forum had fallen completely silent. It seemed one final obstacle needed clearing. One breakthrough yet remained. To recall ESG's concerns from November 2013, the build lacked a critical mass of mana sources and consistency in the colors it could produce, and it had no backup plan to recur a dead threat. It sounds absurd, but the deck without lands was searching for lands that still didn't count as lands. They needed to find that tiny hiccup in the code that lets you walk through walls. Enter the MDFCs. In September 2020, by some strange grace of the gaming gods, Zendikar Rising debuted a new card type, and Oops All Spells went from a deck without lands to a deck with and without lands. In one fell swoop, Agadeem's Awakening / Agadeem the Undercrypt solved all of the remaining problems that kept the Speedrunner sidelined to the fringes of competition. The forum was alive again and buzzing with new ideas. Andrea Mengucci ran an exhibition on Channel Fireball as a nod of external validation. The pros were playing with the forum's dearest science experiment. The real mark of approval came from within, when the mods promoted the deck to established. That's when you know you've really made it. Closing out a year that looked a lot like what 2012 threatened to be, Oops ran through Wednesday webcam events and legacy leagues on MTGO, repeatedly placing in the top 8 and occasionally winning them outright. The deck was real, and it began drawing the attention of the honers and the specialists, the types of players who will run 1,000 reps before making hairline tweaks to their systems, the sickos who turn tiny percentages into massive advantages, the diehards and the tryhards who never tire of doing the same thing over and over and over again. In other words, the speedrunners.
My name is Patrick, also known as Vaulted Forum. I'm primarily a legacy player on MTGO, and I would consider myself a deck expert.
On June 19th, 2021, Faulted Forum went 5-0 in a legacy league running a black-green shell of Oops All Spells. Over the course of the next 4 years, he would play the deck through thousands of leagues, challenges, and super qualifier events on Magic Online, trophy hundreds of them along the way, and think intensely about every single line of text in the pool of playable cards. Oops became Patrick's sole focus in Magic. For a deck dismissed as being so linear that it basically pilots itself, I wanted to know what kept him invested. There must be something deeper here than meets the eye.
I feel weird talking like this, but I have a chip on my shoulder, and I have a very blue-collar personality. To take a deck that nobody respects with really bad cards, to take down Goliath, for lack of a better term, it was a drive for me to work my way up to that level and be competing on that level with a deck with bad cards in it that nobody respects. There is an obsession with finding the holes in the meta that you can attack and exploit.
Consider this common scenario. You're on the play, you perform the magic trick and combo off on turn 1. What do you do going into sideboarding? You haven't seen a single card from your opponent's deck, but they've seen every card in yours by virtue of it flipping into the graveyard. They know exactly how you're trying to win, and you know nothing about their plan at all. For Patrick, this play pattern presented ripe opportunity to experiment with tactics and new tech.
You could steal game 1 easily, you get a free win, quote unquote, and then game 2, you could do whatever you want. You might not even know what the opponent's on, or you could just test out a random strategy and see how that works. And there are a lot of games where I make jokes in the Discord where it's like, yeah, I did this for science. So I think that kind of play style allows you to really explore the depths of what this deck can do and what different style of cards you can use.
One strategy beneath the Oops umbrella is to pivot into a completely different deck post-board. This is called juking, and it branches into 2 subcategories, the Creature Juke and the Belcher Juke. Japanese player Chowden employs the latter in his green-black lists, and it effectively sidesteps removal by redistributing the win condition onto a non-creature artifact. In a way, it allows the Oops deck to shapeshift and hit on a different axis that counteracts the opponent's potential plan against the main combo. Sideboarding with and against Oops then becomes something like going in with a Sicilian when death is on the line. Do you pivot because you expect them to pivot? In that case, do you not pivot? But what if they expect that, and so you pivot against the non-pivot? Now imagine playing this little mind game in paper. Patrick's not much of a juker himself, though. He prefers to keep the deck as efficient as possible.
Personally, I do not support any of the juke strategies. I would describe my strategy of working with the deck as making it as lean as possible. I will always be on board with supporting the just commit to the combo strategy. So that means what cards are you going to put in your sideboard that are going to stop the opponent's hate cards, not what's going to play around them.
Over time, this meant reducing all the possible colors to a mono-black package. Mono-black, of course, is a relatively loose label in a deck like this, but it narrows the efforts toward the main combo pieces.
So the main deck is all mono-black. It's got 12 of the MDFC lands. Any land you draw is guaranteed to be the color you need. It's very strong. It's very fast. It brought back the Cabal rituals for just quicker comboing.
If you prefer a few more options main board, there's a throwback list with Summoner's Pact to get spies on a dime.
The third option is kind of making a revival now. I would call it more of a traditionalist list, mostly championed by Nathan Lipetz, one of the moderators of the Oops Discord. It's almost bringing it back to the original version from 2021.
Around the same time that Patrick began gravitating toward the deck, other players were organizing in a new Discord server that acted as a continuation to the semi-defunct forum threads on the source. Nathan Lipetz, another MTGO grinder, started collecting voluntary match data to track win rates and assess good and bad pairings. He also played a ton of Oops himself and became a leading voice in its development and its defense. Maybe the most impressive byproduct to emerge from this group was a custom hand calculator, which parses all possible draws and shows the odds of finding the combo pieces as protected by disruption magic. It's still an active tool used for testing today. Patrick's approach is less by the numbers. He prefers to follow his experience with the format when making decisions about the deck.
They are very data-based. Being somebody who's played the decks so much, they kind of jokingly call my approach more of a vibes-based approach. But it's the same thing. It's data, but it's based off of play data, not running numbers through a computer model.
Spreadsheets can only take you so far. Actually playing Legacy led Patrick to discover one of the deck's most significant breakthroughs.
I was still playing Turbo Depths at the time. They were running Memory's Journey, and I was on Depths, and I think I like Bajuka Bog them or something, and they put the cards back on top of their library, and I was like, I can't beat this thing. Like, this is crazy. When I started playing Oops, I had that same feeling where I was getting in all these matchups, and I was like, I could have won if I had the Memory's Journey.
Although he was curious to playtest Memory's Journey, the lists were so airtight that no card could realistically be cut and still compete. So Patrick laughed in the face of blasphemy and mainboarded 61 cards instead.
This card is irrelevant other than when it's in the yard. I don't want to draw it, so if it's the 61st card, I'm likely not going to draw it. You mulligan so aggressively, if it's in the opener, I can just shuffle it back. You really just pretend like it's not in the deck.
Despite believing in its power, Patrick still had to convince other players that the extra card was worth the tiny concession in consistency. The hard part about playing with bad cards is sorting out the good bad ones from the bad ones. To sell his case, he prepared a field guide that detailed how to cast Memory's Journey in the most common scenarios in which an opponent is actively fighting your combo.
People didn't believe me of how effective it was. So I started tracking all the different ways that I was winning and all the strategies that could be used. And I kind of just put it out there of like, hey guys, look how technical this is.
Memory's Journey creates mini doomsday piles in a deck like this. The simplest application is regrowing a couple of Lotus Petals and a Thassa's Oracle. More complex plays involve abandoning the main win condition to just attack with creatures like Poxwalkers or tokens from Bridge from Below. In this case, Memory's Journey buys you 3 turns to hit for lethal. Either way, you need green mana to cast it from the yard. If you're on the mono black list, how do you access that mana reliably without the help of Elvish Spirit Guides or a Petal in reserve? Enter yet another bad card.
Jack-o'-lantern was around, and we didn't really pay much attention to it. When I switched over to the blue-black version, you really had no choice but to run it because you needed to make green. It had just proved itself to be so powerful that it like sealed the deal. I was like, I'm running this in every list going forward.
Believe it or not, Jack-o'-lantern is the secret sauce of Oops All Spells. It may be the most powerful and yet most innocuous bad card in the list. Patrick currently runs an unorthodox 2 copies, which allows him to hardcast Thassa's Oracle in clutch spots, or divide mana between off-color spells. This may sound obvious to veteran Oops players, but it only occurred to me while speaking with Patrick that every card in his deck is always available to him, including anything he brings in from the sideboard, because of the synergy between Memory's Journey and the Pumpkin. There may be no other deck in Magic where you can expect to see all of your cards in a single game, but this deck provides that intrinsically as part of its primary mechanism.
You could really put any color of card in your sideboard if you're looking to cast it once the deck is milled.
Wow, I never considered that. Like, the sideboard in this deck is so much more available because of the feature of the deck, like...
Mm-hmm.
And because you have Jack-o'-lantern, yeah, you're right. You could play any card you want as a sideboard tech piece. That's trippy. Wow. What a paradox this deck is. It's a pile of bad cards that wins like no other deck can. Its graveyard is its library. Its lands don't count as lands. It's monocolored but can cast any spell, and its sideboard may contain a different deck entirely. And when you should lose the game, you win the game instead. The speedrunners have optimized Oops All Spells. Their glitches have pushed the code to its utmost limits. The only question that remains now is, how long until the game breaks completely?
Welcome back to the Boss and Roll channel. Today is Monday, June 30th. It's the day of the scheduled ban and restricted update announcement for all formats for Magic the Gathering, and in memoriam, I hope I am playing Oops All Spells.
Brian Coval, known by many as Bosch and Roll, is a bona fide devotee of Eternal Magic. His competitive accolades are many, including winning the SCG Invitational in 2017, spiking Grand Prix Columbus in 2019, and top-8ing 8 Eternal Weekends with 1 outright victory in 2018. His archive of gameplay videos on YouTube spans over 6 years and nearly 1,500 uploads. He's a certified level 2 judge, and he's also a certified hater of Oops All Spells.
I think of Oops All Spells kind of like a Rubik's Cube, where solving it the first time, if you look at a Rubik's Cube, you're like, what is this? How do I get there? But once you memorize the movements and the shapes and how to get from this to this and what order to solve the sides in, people can do it in seconds now. And that's kind of how Oops All Spells works. Finding this deck is brilliant. I think this deck is a masterpiece of what Magic is capable of, and it's beautiful. Hard not to be romantic about baseball, and that's how I feel about Magic the Gathering sometimes, especially when I see a deck like Oops All Spells. But once it is explained to you once, and you run through it a couple times, it is very simple to memorize.
Coval was among a cadre of dissenters who expected Oops to be banned in June 2025. When the hammer didn't fall, they voiced their disbelief and leeriness of Wizards' caretaking of the Legacy format. As an outsider to the scene, it was precisely this uproar that drew my attention to the deck at all, since when was Balustrade Spy such a problem? To help catch me up, I asked Brian when Oops went from a sideshow novelty to a Tier 1 pest.
It was with Modern Horizons 3. We already had Goblin Charbelcher. We've already had Cephalid Breakfast. It was not rocket science to figure out that flipping your deck on purpose in a deck with no lands is something we could do. So the deck materialized instantaneously, but it was Modern Horizons 3 that really brought it to where it is now.
Modern Horizons 3 released on June 14th, 2024. The set added a suite of Zendikar Rising-style modal double-faced lands, 2 per color, that could enter untapped by paying 3 life. The printing of Boggart Trawler and Fell the Profane was the only reason that Patrick's mono-black strategy could exist at all.
The deck just has 12 perfect on-color untapped lands now, and turns out good mana makes for a stronger deck, especially in a deck that is not supposed to have any lands in it.
After a series of bannings to other problematic cards in the format, targeted mostly at the Reanimator shell, Carmen Complarens wrote in the March 31st BNR announcement, Blood Moon Stompy and Oops All Spells are prime examples of decks that have seen their meta share rise in the past few months. Ideally, the above changes will create space for more counterplay against these decks over time. In the short run, the inverse became true. Oops entered the spotlight in April by becoming the second most popular deck online and winning multiple leagues, and through May and June, calls for its banning began cropping up everywhere. The most compelling argument against Oops is obvious. The deck can win without giving the opponent a chance to play a game of Magic at all. I asked Brian the difference between this turn 1 deck and the most recent version of Black-Red Reanimator, which had the same potential for explosive openers.
Black-Red Reanimator is a fast deck that's not really interested in playing Magic against its opponent that uses the graveyard. It shares all of those similarities with Oops. There's decisions versus Black-Red. Do I fight over the Entomb? Do I fight over the Reanimate? Do I fight over the Dark Ritual before they even get to the Entomb? Do I trust this Surgical Extraction to be good enough? There's these pinch points that are pretty interesting. When Oops All Spells works, it is over. The game stops. There is no window to scramble. There is no backup. It just happens. And it's over. Is it okay for games to frequently end on turn 1? Is that something we want in the format, even though the data does not necessarily put it there? Oops is around 50% win rate and around 5% play rate over the last few months. Yeah, those numbers aren't there, but also it's not fun for a lot of people to play with or against that deck. So there's a lot to balance there.
Allowing data to dictate decisions is one approach, but banning cards based on player sentiment is a much trickier endeavor. Some don't like that Oops can outright steal games. Others don't like that Oops' entire win condition exploits the rulebook. Because the front side of an MDFC is technically not a land, Balustrade Spy doesn't see it when grinding, which allows it to circumvent the restriction and mill the entire deck anyway. But changing this rule would let loose an even larger torrent of problems, even if it makes intuitive sense to do so. There's also the question of optics. Sometimes a deck's reputation outweighs its viability. Throughout the summer of 2025, Oops was repeatedly failing the groan test, which spurred more complaints, which then ballooned into complaints about the complaints. Author and data analyst Joe Dyer wrote in the middle of May that the format was extremely warped by the deck's existence, and it didn't seem to be getting any better. Reddit user Throck made their case in a post of their own, claiming Legacy is not a slot machine, to hundreds of replies. Podcasters and YouTubers chewed on the subject with and without bias, but always with nuance, which then created more discourse and perceived outrage. As is often the case in Magic, bickering about Oops became a hobby horse all its own.
I don't think Oops is as strong as people give it credit for, because there was a core group of like 3 to 4 different players that are challenge grinders. So they put up a lot of results in challenges of top 8s, and it was always the same people. It was the same 3 players. Outside of that, you don't see many people doing well with the deck consistently.
This discrepancy in results between the experts and the generalists points to another downside of using data as a useful metric. How do you account for player skill in the numbers? Returning to Joe Dyer's work, by the end of August, Oops had fallen out of favor in the meta, and it was notably absent from relevant top 8s throughout the month. In a revealing matrix of head-to-head matchups pulled from the Legacy Data Collection project, Oops' numbers were not nearly as damning as its reputation would suggest. It had sizable advantage over other combo decks like Sneak and Show, Mystic Forge, and Omnitel, but abysmal rates against Lands, Tempo, and Dimir Reanimator, the format's ongoing boogeyman. Judging strictly by these figures, Oops was more or less a normal Magic deck in a relatively diverse metagame. Just as well, there is a real difference between playing on Magic Online and playing in paper, especially in Legacy, where players tend toward pet decks at the local level.
On Magic Online, you can play 5 rounds of Oops All Spells, go 4-1, collect some tickets, and do it on a 30-minute lunch break. The volume is worth something if you're just grinding to expand your MTGO account. In paper, if you're sleeving up a deck, taking the time to drive to the LGS, paying your entry fee, you're going to be there hanging out with people for 4 or 5 hours regardless. That's kind of a different investment. Did you do all that to play 11 minutes of Magic tonight? And if you did, power to you. But most people don't, I have found.
I'm not going to sit here and act like beating people on turn 1 is a good feeling. But we are also in a serious environment, you know? When I'm playing leagues, when I'm in a challenge, that's for money. I wouldn't take Oops to like an F&M where you're going to have fun. But if we're in like a serious tournament mode, like, yeah, I'm going to bring Oops.
Yet another feature of this deck is that games end quickly. So many self-indulgent combo decks of Magic's past take extremely long turns to churn through their engines. Sometimes, after spending 15 minutes going through the motions, the whole thing fizzles anyway, which means you can't just scoop at the beginning of the chain. If Oops can promise anything, it's that it doesn't waste anybody's time at the table. It's also relatively inexpensive to purchase. Both Brian and Patrick appreciate that a budget deck can win meaningful games in a format with massive financial barriers to entry. Combine that with a core gameplay pattern that's easy to learn but hard to master, and suddenly this may just be someone's gateway into playing Eternal Magic. If that's true, newbies will have to get used to losing to go the distance with this deck. Anyone can solve a Rubik's Cube, but how many can do it blindfolded? How many times did Count LG restart the run due to mistimed jumps or plain bad luck before breaking the world record?
As a newer player, somebody coming into Magic or playing Magic Online, you have this anxiety about losing matches. You're going to lose a lot of these games, and it helps you get through that pressure. There's the people who pick up the deck and do well with it a couple times at first because there's the novelty of surprise, and then they hit a wall where they just start losing, and then they don't like the gameplay comparative to the losing, so they'll walk away from it. Oops will never truly catch on as being like a format menace like Reanimator. I really feel like it's harder to win with a deck just based on the amount of strategies you'll be up against to stop you. You really have to put in the work to become familiar with what you're facing.
All that said, Magic is still a game and people value their experience playing it. Even if the numbers never surpass the bannable threshold, even if the speedrunners never outright break legacy, some folks may never come around on Oops All Spells. We all have a deck we love to hate, and I don't believe you if you claim otherwise.
I think the Wizards' write-up on the deck on the last BNR was very accurate, and I agree with their points. I don't think that the win rates and the data really back up needing a ban, but I could see if people just hate it and they want it gone. And I'm okay with that too, even though it's like my baby or labor of love. I'm fine with accepting, the health of a format, or like people wanting to play a format over like being selfish of a deck choice.
I really think Oops is a masterpiece. It deserves to be enshrined. I think that it's very cool, and I think Lash combo is very cool. I think Underworld Breach combo is very cool. I think there's a lot of things on the Legacy ban list that are very cool, and that's where they belong.
At the end of November 2024, at Eternal Weekend in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Patrick took 23rd place running Oops All Spells. In a field of 1,155 players, he was one of only 9 people total to bring the deck to the tournament. Patrick says he got lucky with his matchups, but felt fully in control of all his wins. Looking forward, I asked both him and Brian if they'd bring Oops to this year's tournament. I bet you could guess their responses.
I would bring the current mono black version I'm playing, and I do plan to go. As far as like what's in the room, I've heard that a lot of people don't play Oops in paper, so I would expect that it's kind of just the diehards that play, that's their deck and that's what they prefer to play. So I don't expect the room to be full of it.
Straight up, would you take Oops to Eternal Weekend?
No, I would not. The truth is the win rate is not there for banning. If you're going in with a weighted coin, just slightly weighted 51, let's even say it's a bannable 55%. How many times can you flip that weighted coin before your Eternal Weekend is over? I value Brainstorm and Ponder and my ability to navigate difficult situations rather than simply lose to difficult situations when I'm in a situation where every match is life and death.
Although Patrick and Brian take different approaches to the game, both agree that registering for a tournament gives players full license over their deck choices. They believe in that right as a principle of competitive Magic, and they will exercise it alongside the many who attend the Eternal Weekend series this fall and winter. Coval plans to battle in all 3 tournaments to close out the year. He calls this event his Super Bowl. Meanwhile, I will be watching from a distance, wondering if Oops will make a splash or maybe even go on a killer run and spike the whole thing. Maybe the meta has already elbowed this deck out of position. Maybe you'd have to be a real gambler to bring a weighted coin that barely flips in your favor. Beyond Eternal Weekend, I wonder what the fate of Oops All Spells looks like in Legacy. I wonder if it will ever be accepted as a pillar of the format rather than its anomaly. I wonder if the speedrunners will one day find their game-breaking glitch in the throwaway commons of a drawn-out preview season. It's often repeated that seeing your deck banned is the ultimate compliment, the endgame of any combo worth its weight. I don't know if I agree. Because decks don't appear from the ether, they are made in anonymous collaboration. Behind the curtain, so many stagehands have slowly built this spectacle over the course of more than a decade. A competitive Magic deck is the collective effort of an amorphous entity. Thousands of people working in the background, testing, thinking, grinding. My partnership continues this year with Foil Armor by Integra Products, the safest and most effective way to flatten your curled cards. Holographic trading cards warp due to differences in humidity between where they were manufactured and where they are now. A stack of heavy books won't fix that, but these two-way humidity control packs do. They've been specifically engineered to reset convex and concave cards. Keep your foils in tip-top shape so they look good on the battlefield and hold their value in your collection binder in the years to come. Go to flattenmycards.com and purchase some 8-gram foil armor packs for individual use and some bigger 33-gram packs for long-term storage. Use code STUDIES at checkout for 15% off. Thanks Foil Armor for the support. There's a certain purity to the earliest versions of the Oops deck, when its combo required so many wacky cards and played just as many unserious games. that you can't help but admire it. In Game 3 of the deck's first SCG showing, Ben Williams faced a turn 1 Grafdigger's Cage. After a brief pause, he went to his draw step.
So there's an island. Oh, there's a Grafdigger's Cage.
Boy.
All right.
Ben Williams, I hope you boarded in Nature's Claims.
Good luck to Ben Williams here. Let's see if he has an answer for it.
He might. Oh, he scoops.
Oh, what?
Ben Williams concedes the match. He didn't side in any Nature's
All right,
Claims.
so another turn 1 kill.
Effectively a turn 1 kill.
I guess you can't spell scoops without oops. Speaking with Patrick for this video was enlightening. He helped me see all the invisible intricacies required to pilot this deck well. Part of what makes him so skilled with the deck is his understanding of timing.
Part of what I love about the deck too is there's a sub game of a psychology battle. The opponent expects a turn 1 and they're gonna play pressured, they're gonna play afraid, and you can use that to your advantage. I kind of have a reputation, obviously. So when people pair into me online, they're already game 1 mulliganing to Soul Guide Lantern, stuff like that. So I'm already playing in a way where I expect my opponent to know what I'm doing. And people think it's this, slam turn 1 deck, but I'll go turn 2, I'll go turn 3. I'll make sure I have a protected route to safely combo. So what's more important is that you're winning on 1 turn and not necessarily turn 1.
Just as well, I loved hearing from Coval about Legacy at the macro level. The Oops phenomenon is but a tiny fraction of this format's rich and storied history. Many consider it to be the best way to play constructed heads-up Magic. Brian closed our call with a message to those curious about entering the format.
Commander is the entry point to Magic these days. Commander has a smaller ban list than Legacy does. You could play with more cards, and you have to keep track of 3 opponents instead of 1. Commander is more complicated than Legacy. And if you are afraid of trying something new because of the perceived complexity, just show up, start to learn. It'll be fine. And that's what everybody says when they see me play Legacy on my channel. They're like, well, I thought Legacy was unapproachable. Then I watched a few of your videos and realized it's pretty cool.
I fully endorse that message. Thank you to both Brian and Patrick for helping me with this project. Thank you to my sponsors, and the biggest thank you to my patrons whom you see here. Join for $5 to support the show and get your name on this list alongside all these generous people. They are the lifeblood of independent creative work, and they make me so proud to do what I do. Just as I was wrapping up writing this video, I went for a walk and put on the Unsleeved podcast. The Patricks were talking about metagames and they brought up the existence of turn 1 decks in a format. The coincidence made me chuckle.
If there's just Manaless Belcher in Standard, but let's say there's like a ton of lands that are lands on the backside, but they're not on the front side, and it plays a real game, and the deck's not that good, but it happens to kill you on turn 1 6% of the time, I still wouldn't want that to be like 2.5% of the metagame in Standard. If your deck is even like built in this super weird way and you're getting turn 1 kills, then I think you're really cutting out the coolness of what it means for there to even be turn 1 kills.
As always, Chapin makes a great point. Thanks for watching.